everybody, it's Eric Pappenfuss. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day. And today, Amanda, inspired by the new Bob Dylan movie and this wonderful Christmas present from my brother, which came from the Arlo Guthrie Museum and is a t-shirt tribute to Pete Seeger. That is the motto that Pete Seeger had on his banjo. And as a fun fact, the one autograph I got in person by a famous celebrity that I'm most proud of was Pete Seeger's. And but today we're going to talk about 3 songs from 1965, 60 years ago, Amanda, each of which was based on a poem that we can find in a book right here in the collectibles room of the Midtown Scholar Bookstore. Doesn't that sound like fun?
Yeah.
And these are 3 of my favorite folk songs from 1965, so let's get right to it. And let's get out the first book, which is a book of poetry by Edwin A. Robinson, who's an American poet. I like this version. This is his collected works. It's a signed binding by Revere and Sons. If you look here on the bottom of the front free end paper, that's oftentimes how binders sign their work. But they did a beautiful job binding this. And the poem we're going to talk about today is a poem by the name of Richard Cory, which was quite famous at the time in 1965 already. Robinson was much beloved. He'd already won the Pulitzer Prize multiple times for poetry. But 2 young students in New Jersey, Art Garfunkel and Paul Simon, read it in class. And then Paul Simon decided to make a version of the song on their second album called Sounds of Silence. And that version, Richard Cory, is a loose adaptation of this version, which is the original poem. And I thought one of the things we could talk about today was how the songs actually improved or dramatically changed the meanings of the original poems. But first, let's hear a little bit of Art and Paul.
They say that Richard Cory owns 1/2 of this whole town, with political connections to spread his wealth around. Born into society, a banker's only child, he had everything a man could want: power, grace, and style.
So, back to the poem. Now, you'll notice in the original poem, Amanda, it's actually pretty short and sweet. It's a story about the Panic of 1893, a rich guy by the name of Richard Cory. Everybody wants to be like him, but in the end, he went home and put a bullet through his head. And what's interesting is that when the poem came out, this was considered revolutionary. First of all, it wasn't the topic of American poetry generally at the time, but secondly, it was considered sort of a dramatic ending, which really made the poem. Now, Paul Simon, supposedly at the time when he wrote his song version of Richard Cory, was in England very depressed. And he was depressed because their first album, Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., had not sold well in America. He did not think his musical career was going to take off. He went to England and he wrote a series of songs. And it was there in England, while singing songs like Richard Cory, that he actually heard Sounds of Silence on the radio for the first time and knew that it actually had become a hit in his absence, which is sort of cool. And here's a little Eric trivia. The first CD I purchased in the 1980s, when CDs first became available, was Simon & Garfunkel's Sounds of Silence. Yes, I was that type of kid. And today, you can either get the album version over at the Scholar in our pop culture room, where we have LPs and vinyl, or you can come over here and get the original poetry in the collectibles building. But Paul Simon made an important change, Amanda. He changed the ending of the poem. First of all, he modernized Richard Cory. So Richard Cory this is very early 20th century language. He was not clean, favored, and imperially slim. No. He was having, orgies on his yacht and everything else, if you listen to the original song. But at the end of the song, Amanda, it does not end with "went home and put a bullet through his head." In fact, you then hear a series of drum beats, which sound like gunshots, or a quick strumming of the guitar if he's doing it in an acoustic version. And then we repeat the refrain, which is that everybody still wants to be like Richard Cory. So for Paul Simon, it didn't matter that he had killed himself. people still wanted to be like him. And I don't think it was the same thing for Edwin Robinson. He was trying to warn people and shock people into realizing what was really important in life. Okay, so different perspective. Our second song is also from 1965, Amanda, and it's by my favorite folk singer, a person I never got a chance to see in person, Phil Ochs. And Phil Ochs decided to do a musical version of this wonderful poem, The Highwayman by Alfred Noyes. Are you familiar with Alfred Noyes or his poems?
I know The Highwayman.
Well, he's a British poet. This is just interesting because it's inscribed by Noyes. Robinson had no early success. In fact, he had to self-publish his poems, including Richard Cory. He had to pay to have them published. He was broke until he was discovered by Theodore Roosevelt. Here's Theodore Roosevelt making an appearance on By Day again, who gave him a sinecure, which was basically a job in which he didn't have to do anything except for write poetry during the day. And that's what made Robinson able to sustain himself as a poet. Noyes was successful right off the bat, because he was in the Tennyson style of British poetry. He was beloved by the British public, and he was very anti-modern. He considered Joyce and Ulysses filth. He didn't want anything to do with the modernist movement. He wanted poems that could sound a lot like songs, or could be recited like songs, and that's what Phil sort of took out of this. The poem was much like songs. Now, Phil did something very different to the poem as well, but before we get into it, let's hear a little bit of Phil's version.
Moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas, and the road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor. And the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. Yes, the highwayman came riding up to the old inn door.
Okay, one of the things that Phil Ochs did was he edited the poem because it would have been too long. It was already a long song by standards of the radio at the day. He took out a series of different stanzas, but since Noyes had written it to be like a song, he was able to preserve most of the words. However, at the end, Noyes ends the poem totally differently. Wherever you see one of these orange things, Phil has excised the words, and where you don't see the orange, it's the original words. But at the end, there is a ghostly return of Bess, the landlord's daughter, and the highwayman and Bess are reunited. That happens in the poem. It does not happen in Phil's song. And that's an important change. Another thing which is really interesting is that Phil actually was more influenced by the movie The Highwayman than the original poem. And in the movie, the story is really about the highwayman's occupation, which was as somebody who stole from the rich and gave to the poor. And their interpretations of this song would say, well, this is one of Phil Ochs' only songs which isn't political. Well, actually, Amanda, it's probably his most political song. It is about sacrifice in the name of socialism, and about defending the ideal of giving to the poor from the rich. A great song. All right, we're going to end with Pete. We love Pete. Now, I just sent you on a mission to try and find a New Testament, an Old Testament Bible, a King James Bible. We did. We were trying to find Ecclesiastes, and we were going to talk about Turn, 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 which was made a hit by the Byrds also in 1965. And Pete Seeger, quite famously, was told by his producer at the time, Pete, could you write something a little more popular? We're tired of all these protest songs. Can you do something, based on a poem, something like Paul or Phil or some of these other people? And Pete said, sure. Who would object to the Bible? And he wrote Turn, 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 which is now one of the most famous songs ever. And the Byrds took it to number one on the charts. Trivia, Amanda, it has the distinction of being the number one hit with the oldest lyrics in history, because it comes from the Bible. But Pete did something very different to the song. He edited out a verse, which is very important and knowledgeable. He edited out a time to keep silent and a time to speak. Pete was not much into not speaking his mind. Yeah. You'll get that if you see the Academy Award nominated performance in the new Bob Dylan movie. But also he ends the song, and the Byrds end it with "I swear it's not too late." Those were the only words, including the word "turn," which Pete contributed to Ecclesiastes, which is that peace is not too late. Unfortunately, Amanda, peace probably was too late in the minds of Solomon and others who were writing these verses. It is a ballad that is filled with violence. So let's hear a little bit of Pete Seeger.
They disagree with each other, we feel like shouting at each other. We have to lower our voice and try, how can we say what needs to be said without making them so angry they will walk out. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under.
And finally, Amanda, we're going to end with a funny book. Now, normally if I was thinking 60s poetry parody, I would go with Shatner, but I've already done Shatner in his spoken word poetry.
Yes.
So it was brought to my attention that I needed to give equal weight to Leonard Nimoy, who was, in fact, a poet as well. A Lifetime of Love, Poems and Passages of Life by Leonard Nimoy, in which he gives his own take on Pete Seeger's Turn, Turn, Turn. You can read his A Time to Give, but you can only do that if you come to the poetry section of the Midtown Scholar. Well, that's another edition of By Day Friday. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll watch next week and every week, Fridays at noon, for more adventures in the world of books.